Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation and Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So, aliens, right? What a topic. It's like, funny enough is that it just sort of came to me, and then I was like, all right, well, I'll let it come in because I know there's obviously some relevance if it came in to talk about. There's a lot going on. So interesting. And I haven't even looked at the information. I've just sort of seen it topically out there. I've seen that, apparently there's more disclosure going on. There are more government files being, unclassified and things like that. And, it's interesting because you have like a lot of judgments about those who talk about aliens, or what we call aliens, what I call star beings. But what came to me that's really, really important, and we can talk about that, because then there's this judgment about people who talk about that, and then there's people, then there's judgment calling them conspiracy theorists, and there's all this kind of other stuff. But again, like I said last week, let's put all the judgments on the shelf for this half hour and just sort of look at the core of certain parts of this, because it's a topic that's not going away. It's been under, it's been rumbly for a long time. We have a lot of TV and movies about this right now. And we are still in this grasping stage, this stage of thinking, and partially because for such a very long time, we have wanted to, the ego has, good morning, Gloria. We have wanted to claim that we were the center of the multiverse, right? That we're the only living beings, that we're the only sentient consciousness. And we created that idea out of ego, right? And out of forgetfulness. And so what's interesting is, so like we think of when we talk about aliens or whatever, we think of them in a certain way. However, here's the funny thing. Think of the word alien, right? So the word alien means something. I don't even look up the definition, but I'll tell you that the definition is something along the lines of something that is foreign to us and unknown, right? An alien being, an alien planet, an alien molecule or whatever. Like, we find these things and then we want to put these definitions on them, which we've talked about so much. And really, what's so interesting is to think, okay, when we talk about aliens right now, we usually talk about things like, something coming in some being coming in a ship, flying down, getting off, ET, or Independence Day, like they're going to abolish us, or you're curious or whatever. Oh yeah, Sarah says illegal alien. Well, I look at what we call immigrants, right? That aren't registered or naturalized or whatever. Illegal aliens. The term alien just implies foreign, unknown, different, right? Different than the norm of what we consider the norm. And that is, of course, in the perspective of everybody's individual journeys, right? So something that's alien to me might not be alien to you, because it's something that's been, or vice versa. Something alien to one culture, right, would be completely normal to another. How many times over the centuries has like a very civilized civilization, or not supposed to be here, Sarah says, right, or not supposed to be here. So think about, like, within this planet, right, over the centuries, we've had, a more developed civilization go in and visit a less developed civilization. And sometimes they're thought to be, sorcerers or gods or goddesses, because they have all this technology or things that they don't have, that's foreign to what that culture has in its commonality. And so think about the virus thing that we have going on. This is what sort of hit me when I was blow drying my hair before this, is, think about that. what is a virus? But it's something alien that gets in and attaches to you and reprograms, right? Um, and think of the fear, the innate fear that has come out through this strangely sort of not so malignant virus. I mean, I know a lot of people will argue with me about that, but just this particular virus. It's almost like we're having the alien invasion, or we believe we're having the alien invasion, because look at how we've locked down and shut down, and we're afraid of each other. We're afraid to go out, like in general, like many in the mass public. So where that comes from is that idea of separation, that there's something outside of us that is in us, right? And this goes back to that whole acceptance that we're all one, that we're all connected. And, we have, even in multiple sciences, now proven that there are multiple dimensions just right here on Earth. And so, like, many of us know this already. Well, we all know this. Many of us remember this already. And so then once we start to look at things as, yes, and Sarah says unsafe, right? That's what we think of as things that are unknown, that are not us, not supposed to be here, not just doesn't fit in the norm. We start thinking of them as alien and unsafe and scary, right? So anyway, so going back to this, so in consciousness, we know that there are multiple dimensions, many, many, many bajillions of dimensions, which is why I call it the multiverse. It's the universe of multiverses. And we all interact, and we're very aligned and assimilated, and it's part of this beautiful holographic multiverse that we've created. So when we look at things from that perspective, like, we are so, I'm going to say the word ethnocentric, meaning on the whole planet, because we've been this way for so long, thinking, oh, we're so great, we're sentient beings, and we know better than, like there's nothing else out there for the longest time, right? There's no other life out there. Well, and then what's funny is we make our judgments based on the definitions that we have here in this particular set of dimensions, and we try to apply them across the multiverse, which doesn't necessarily pan out all the time, because when we do that, it's like, well, but each dimension has its own set of rules or laws that we've created, or it has its own foundation or structure. And yes, does it integrate? It does, except we might not know it or understand it because it's foreign to us, or something we have not remembered how to traverse or even perceive until now. I did some work with some friends in March, where we got together and did a little enclave of collective work we were guided to do. And I know many out there are doing that sort of under the radar, just because we're just being guided to do that. And some not so much. It's fine. It's all good. Anyway, so in doing that, we were doing some really higher consciousness work. And we each went individually and all sort of had a piece of this collective remembrance to come into. And it's interesting because we can sort of structure it like what we call past life regression, sort of a hypnosis, takes us out of this presence and into a much higher presence, much different presence, and sort of takes out all the doorways, all that kind of stuff. And I will say that every time I do that, and I do that with myself, we do that the more we do our own self-work and meditation, expansion of our own consciousness. But, the person who was helping to guide me through, right, would ask me questions. And I almost immediately was in these, I remember, in these different dimensions, and each dimension had its own structure, but it was all connected. Like, there were doorways that were all connected to each other. So then she was asking me questions, and it was like, I didn't have any words to explain what I was seeing and feeling and understanding. And I had to sort of allow myself to be there to remember what that dimension did, what its purpose was, how it functioned, how I was there, how I was a part of it, or to be a part of it, or to interact with it, or as part of it. And so, but it took a while because we're in this place of forgetfulness. And it wasn't a place of fear, right? It was a place of, actually, for me, I was like a kid in a candy store because I was like, oh, look at this dimension. Oh, okay, I know this. And it was like, I couldn't even explain to you how I understood how one fit with the other because it's just a much bigger understanding than what we tend to practice in consciousness here in this set of dimensions on Earth. And it's not that we're separate, because we're not, but it's that we've forgotten, and that was part of the game. That's what we've chosen to do, right? That's what we chose to come here to do. So here's the thing. When we go into those other dimensions, as we expand our consciousness, and as we expand our consciousness, let me explain this. We get into a place of traversing different vibrational brackets, what I call sort of vibrational brackets, or frequency brackets. And as we open and expand ourselves, we allow ourselves access to vibrational frequencies and aka dimensions or whatever that we might not have been consciously able to access in our physical body before, because we had so much of this density that we've been, while this part of our consciousness is here, good morning, Anne, that we've been sort of immersed in, right? That we, of course, know at our higher level of consciousness, we just sort of forget since we're managing our bodies and our realities in this particular set of dimensions for the purpose of the larger project, right? So as we're coming into consciousness, it's all about remembering we are one piece, like this manifestation, which is what this set of dimensions is here on Earth, is but one piece to a much bigger project, to a much bigger puzzle of other dimensions, conscious, focused, what I'm going to call focused consciousness, because we focus pieces of our consciousness to embody here, right? So then there's different kinds of embodiments, things that I have perceived. And so this is so this does tie all into the alien thing. I'm getting there. It takes a little bit. Because when we start to see that and understand it and remember it, then we begin to understand that, oh, well, this is all part of the same thing, right? We have just as many dimensions within our bodies as outside of our bodies. So we have an infinite number in all directions, and they're all interactive, right? They're all interrelated in one way, shape, or form, and they all do a certain purpose, do a certain function. We could call our cells different dimensions. We can call so many different things. So we personify things that we think aren't personified, right? We do that now just for fun, whatever, for fun, right? We do like cartoons or whatever for people to understand simple things. And we'll personify things like the cell, we'll personify things like the piece and parts of the cell. But there's no reason to not, because it's all part of the consciousness, right? And so when we start to see that, right, when we start to see that first within ourselves, right, that there's trillions of pieces of consciousness and dimensions within my body that allow me to form here in this density and set of dimensions, and present in this dimension, even though I have all these other dimensions inside of me as this particular individual, and to focus a piece of consciousness here, that's a pretty incredible thing, right? It's pretty mind-bending. It's pretty cool. When we start to see that, right, then we start to and then we really can accept it. The next step is pushing outward and looking at all the dimensions around us. Like people who still say, oh, well, the fairy dimension, like fairies are, your imagination. Fairies are another, the whole fae realm is another set of dimensions. And that's actually set of dimensions that is here and overlaying here. And the reason there's so much more understanding of it is that the vibrations are starting to overlap for many of us in terms of the way we live our everyday consciousness, and the way and where the vibrational, the frequency brackets are, right? Or frequency ranges are. And so then what happens is this. Okay, so I know more and more people who are saying, oh my God, I saw a fairy. I've seen a fairy. I've seen this. I've seen that. And then, the old way of thinking is, Oh yeah, you're just imagining things. You're making things up. Oh, that's fun and creative. And yeah, okay, that's just make believe. But it's not. Um, it's either all make believe, including us, or it's none, or none of it is. So it really is all sort of make believe, because as a divine consciousness of the whole, we have created all these different pieces and parts as part of the whole symphony. And it is all illusion, it's, at some level, but it's also just as real. Every part is just as real as the other. It's just where we and how we experience it and interact with it and act as a part of it, because we're all part of those dimensions too. It's just whatever part of our consciousness allows that connection. So that's a little mind-bending. So it's funny because I was like, oh, okay, now I see this. I see when I was seeing this come in. So what would be the difference to see a fairy than to see an alien? People tend to feel more of a camaraderie, believe it or not, with fairies, except, because we consider them like a child's plaything, right? A play, like imagination thing. But because we feel like, the fae live here on our planet, or like even if it's a different like set of vibrations, right, that we still feel like they're not alien because they're here and they know this planet and how we live and how we structure and everything else. However, I will tell you that the fairy representations are not carbon based. Like I was saying, going back to where we consider our definitions of everything in the multiverse, where from the human perspective, from this density perspective, it's like managing managing a mountain from a tiny little ant. And it's like saying, so I'm going to manage this and I'm going to move it or change it or whatever. I'm going to say that it's well, what would an ant say about a mountain? Wow, that's a really big anthill. That's like the mother of all anthills. Wow, that's incredible. It's a little scary because it's so big. Think about it. That's what an ant would say. This piece of our consciousness is that small, if not even smaller, of our entire consciousness. And we've been in such a practice of being here, just like really being immersed in this, that we're just in the habit of managing from that. So as we, again, expand our consciousness to include other, like, and to be able to remember how to access different vibrational frequency ranges, then we realize more and more the interconnectedness of everything, right? So I might have like a carbon-based physicality here, and there might be something that's completely complementary in another dimension of my presence and my wholeness, right? That's me and not me at the same time. But the whole like understanding is, if you go back, I always end up like my Thursday, this thing on Thursday always connects to my Monday ascended world that I do with Sarah Siga Avignoni. And Monday we were talking about, I just lost it. Wow. It just flew away because I had to put words in there. It'll come back. But, when what was I going to say now that had to do with the Monday thing? It'll come back. But when we start to accept everything within ourselves, right? And we accept that things are part of us. And then we start talking about something that is outside the scope of what we tend to remember, then we think of it as alien. Okay. So what if we are just the cells of another bigger consciousness? That's the way I sort of see it. I mean, and we are that consciousness as much as we're the cells. And then the cells are just as much of our consciousness as we are. It's sort of like that whole concentricity thing, I call it. And so would that be alien? No, it would just be a part of like who we are. And then it becomes less scary, right? Because then the ego is not going, oh, there's something outside of us that I don't know, and it's going to kill us and hurt us and whatever. Because it can, right? Oh, that's what I was going to say. When I was talking about the anti-me, like in some other like dimension that has a completely different form or whatever, but balance like completes like the presentation in some way, shape, or form, like my shadow. Maybe it's a shadow dimension, right? But that's how we created in duality. This is what we talked about on Monday in Ascended World. So if you're interested in this, you can go and listen to that because that was really good. But talking about how in duality, in the creation of separation throughout this multiverse, right? We've created the yin yang, right? We've created everything, and definition is based on the definition of its opposite, and without the opposite, it wouldn't exist, right? So think about that. So if we're just thinking about, okay, so if there's this positive me, right? Like in atoms, there's a positive and negative electrons and stuff like that. So if there's a positive presentation of me and then a negative, right, to complete that presentation, that's overlaying, like directly made of dark matter, right, which is what physics is talking about a lot of right now, then that's not alien, that's just me. And so when we start to see that, and then we start expanding out saying, okay, well, what came to me not too long ago was that one of the consciousness of star beings, what I call star beings, many call aliens, that gets channeled in at higher frequencies right now are Pleiadians, right? And so I've had an affinity and understanding of Pleiadians for a while. I've had connection with that consciousness for a long time. And what came to me in understanding was that we expressed here are individual facets of a collective that we call the Pleiadians, which are represented in a different part of the multiverse, and we consider them as beings, right? So it is, and I'm not saying that they're not, I'm saying that they are just a different kind altogether, and that we're part of that, sort of like the cells and organs and whatever that make up that consciousness at this point. And of course, I am that just as much as I'm this. It's a little mind-blowing, because then when we start saying that, right, so we say Pleiadians and we say Syrians, and we say Andromedans in spirituality, right? We talk about them. We talk about Blu-ray beings. It's another set of dimensions. There's so many, and I can't even think of the names of all of them. There's Illyrians. These are all different bands of frequency of consciousness that we connect with. So in consciousness, because we do it from a place of wholeness, right, it comes through in a loving way. Now, there's reptilians, there's Anunnaki, there's those who then people fear. But what if that is a shadow representation of us that we're still denying, and yet they're us, which is pretty much the case, is my understanding. So it's this, when we start looking at things this way, we stop seeing them as alien, because it's just like another facet of ourselves, or we're just another facet of them, right? So that's a lot, so then it's like, well, well, then there's nothing scary about that, right? Because that's actually pretty cool to think that we're coming together. Now, in our minds, because we think in separation, when we talk about aliens, we think, like I said, of some strange being coming in a spaceship and landing, right? And I've always felt like that's such a very ego-based representation. And I'm not saying that there are no spaceships out there, but really in higher vibration and frequency, the travel becomes vibrational, and it shifts the way you do things completely, right? So it's funny. I believe that our field of quantum physics is going to help us remember that faster. So it'll be interesting to watch that in the near future, but having to do with things like what we consider space travel, like instead of getting in a ship and going someplace, that's like the first step. But then also, what if we just create a wormhole and we're here and there, or we just shifted our vibration, our whole body vibration, to be in a different realm of consciousness that could be another planet right overlaying this one in the same space. And in quantum physics, it doesn't matter if it's here on the other side of the multiverse, it is, or the universe, it is the same. There's no difference. So that's the stuff for us to start playing with. And I find that like a playground, like of possibility. And so all we face are the different facets of ourself we've forgotten or denied ourselves, right? And in consciousness, we come to a place of understanding this is just another facet of me. When I first started doing this stuff, let's see, what's Gloria say? When many people can't accept differences between people and between beliefs for them, becomes hard to accept anything else that is alien. Well, that's the thing is we are in such a place of denial and exclusion here, with the opportunity to transcend it into remembrance and wholeness. That's the opportunity we have because we've pushed ourselves to the point of breaking. Right? I mean, we really have. And funny that how would we then manifest a representation of the darkest parts of ourselves that we feel is alien and something to be afraid of, but in a virus, right? Because then it's something that we believe can invade us, can make us sick, can kill us, blah, 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 that's out of our control that we can be a victim to. What a perfect representation. And so so it's for us to turn around and say, okay, so, and the very beginning of all of this, and I've said this before, I was guided to go out there to see that virus as me, to think it for what it was there to show us and help us remember, to allow it to, be welcomed home. And I feel like it's not even in my range. There's nothing in my body or being to resist it. And there's no reason for it to limit me in any way. So therefore, it can just pass through me, even if I come across it. That's what we do vibrationally. And so, in the physical, we already are it. It is us. So the more we start seeing things as us and not as alien, the more we evolve and change very rapidly. So, one thing I wanted to sort of talk about too is an interesting little point, and I have a couple minutes left. So one of the things, and so like when we start looking at it that way, it's like, but, and it's like, well, I don't know. What do we want to talk about? Alien ships. Is it another dimension of us? Is it another consciousness of us? Is it another, of course it is, in what way, but when we start looking at it are these things or beings or whatever different representations of us? Are these things that we have created in our consciousness because we imagined it, because that's how powerful we are? Yeah. And to me, like what I've said from the beginning is, yeah, well, the aliens are already here. By the way, we are them anyway. When we start looking at, okay, this galaxy or this, part of the multiverse or these other dimensions, it's a vast expanse, far more than what we're talking about in carbon-based form and particular kinds of, physicality and the way we base our definition of things, right? So, we're looking at things on frequency. We're starting looking at things more on frequency. And so one of the big things that perplex people, and you have the whole, another whole field of discussion, are crop circles. And they're like, oh, okay, it's alien beings communicating with us and whatever. So what if it's just us communicating with ourselves? And what's really interesting about the crop circles that they've not been able to deem false or made up or whatever, is that the forms that they take are what we call sacred geometry, which are basic functions, of this multiverse. And if you look at, they have these machines that vibrate at different frequencies. And if you put sand on them, I've talked about this before, the sand will automatically make these shapes. And we do that, and it's like really cool to see because you change frequency and the sand will change the shapes that they make. It's pretty cool. And that goes back to the whole discussion on the whole multiverse is done in frequency versus if we looked at things in frequency versus representation, it's a very different perspective. So what's there to say that there's not this other vibration of ourselves and our consciousness, which it all is anyway, whether we want to call it Pleiadian or Sirian or Lyran or whatever, or reptilian, or we want to call it us, just call it us. But then the ego goes, oh, that's just fun. We've got to put definitions on stuff, right? But anyway, who are we to say like that that it's not ourselves talking to ourselves collectively, putting in a certain frequency that would cause this particular sacred geometry in the crops so that we could see it at a much bigger level or feel it or look at it at a much bigger level, right? A big mass communication to ourselves. Have we looked at that? I don't even know. I don't know if anybody's looked at those sacred geometry particular, all the forms that come in and looked at what frequency that causes them to vibrate at, when we try the sand thing. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. But it feels to me, has always felt to me like it's a frequency communication of remembrance. And it feels really very much like a collective part of ourselves that is just sort of stamping the ground to anchor in those vibrations, help us anchor in those vibrations so we can remember and bring ourselves sort of all up into that same speed. So it's a lot of stuff to process. And it was just so, like I said, so funny because I have a lot going on this weekend and I was like, oh, well, I could skip this week. And then it was like, no, you've got to go talk about aliens. And I was like, what? But I mean, it's important for us to see this because when we start to choose that, because it's funny, I know people that I've worked with and there's one person I specifically that when I first met her, if like she was in a group, spiritual discussion group, whatever, where we were talking, where aliens came up, she'd be like, oh, these people are crazy. And she could talk about anything else, but then she would start judging it and getting all uncomfortable and all kind of stuff. Right. And then it's funny because, years have gone by and she comes back to me and she's like, I am so fascinated with this whole topic now. And it's not scary to me anymore. And it just seems like it's another part of the whole story that we're not yet putting together. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So think about that. And the thing for us is to accept that. And I just don't even use the term alien in my vocabulary. I'm using it because right here, it's for others who it's important for us to start shifting our perspective on it. I call like something that we call the consciousness from other planets or galaxies or whatever, star beings, right? Or what I understand them to be. And by the way, angels, archangels, ascended masters, like star beings is like people have asked, is there any difference? I'm like, really? No. And is there any difference between them and us? And it's like, really? No. That's an easy thing to say and a challenging thing for us to remember because our mind wants to define and exclude and prioritize and create a hierarchy. So as we're resolving that and completing that whole set of lessons, then it's like, okay, well, let's just look at how it works all together without judgment of one thing being more important than the other, because the symphony is the symphony. So look at that. Look at where you are scared of things that are alien today, right? And that's the funny thing. Let me just say one more thing, because I know I've gone over for a minute. So look, illegal aliens, what Sarah brought up earlier on. I think it's bizarre that we think that people, just because they have a different cultural norm, are different. Because what brings us together typically, right? Catastrophes, things that we consider catastrophes, cataclysms, blah, blah, blah. When we start to look in things in the same way and saying, okay, well, really what's important is that we're, that it's all of us. I saw a quote once that one of the astronauts, I think it was John Glenn, talking about the first time he looked back at the Earth and just thought, well, all you see is an Earth. Like you don't see political boundaries, you don't see different countries, you just see one presentation. And that's what's really the opportunity for us to get to right now. and to stop talking about other people as if they're foreign and alien, right? And that's just as much within this country, from state to state, from political party to political party. It's like time to just stop it and to start seeing our commonalities and where we're connected and the beauty of the differences we bring to the table from that connected standpoint. And so the thing for us this week is to look at where we are in that, like where we are in looking at that. And then look at all this stuff, like think about that. Everything that we are afraid of, we consider alien in some way, right? So that whole thing about aliens is all about a collective way for it to come up for us to look at. And it's going to keep on coming up in different ways until we finally accept it as part of ourselves and not call it alien anymore. So look for that within your own reality, and where you can shift that to come into acceptance and inclusion versus exclusion and denial. And just commit yourself to taking little steps to trying to understand a little more about what you consider alien, or what it could possibly be, or what it looks like from a larger spiritual standpoint. And so, Gloria says that what I love about our world is the differences in our cultures, beliefs, and foods. Yeah, well, that's what we created, right? So, like, it's time for us to start celebrating the differences we've created in our individual situations, even though we are all part of the same thing, as part of the same thing. To say, oh my God, look at the awesome thing that you bring to the table. Or look at this thing that is maybe a shadow side to me that I might not be like comfortable with from the ego, but what a great thing to bring to the table, to bring up, to reflect back to us. That is it. That's all the alien thing is. So, I mean, there's no question, like first of all, since consciousness is the multiverse, then there's nothing outside of that. It's all included, right? And so it's all part of the same. Whether it's here or in another galaxy or wherever, another dimension, another galaxy, or within ourselves, within our dimensions, in between our countries, in between our political boundaries, in between our neighborhoods and our neighbors and our family and ourselves. So look at that this week. Have a great week. Thank you for joining me. This is Angela Coulter bringing you this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.